with all the respect I can muster, my colleague is, what he has said is inaccurate. Now, I understand this is America. You can believe what you want. There's some people that wish we didn't have a second amendment. Madam President, before I explain my amendment, I would like to yield 30 seconds to my good friend Senator Tester.
President, I rise in support of the Kennedy Amendment, in support of Second Amendment rights for veterans of Montana and across this country. It is not right that a D.C. bureaucrat at the VA could take away a veteran's legal right to their firearm simply because they need assistance managing their finances. I'll tell you what a Montana advocate for veterans told me. Said this VA's longstanding policy to threaten veterans' constitutional rights who ask for their help managing their affairs has been a barrier to veterans to receive help for years. It's time to end it so veterans can reach out for the financial help they need and the mental health they need. I agree, and I don't believe someone who has served this country needs a fiduciary to have to hire a lawyer to go back to court to get their Second Amendment rights. I yield back to Senator Kennedy.
Madam President, there's 16 million veterans in our country. Sometimes some of them need help managing their financial affairs. When they do, they go to the Veterans Administration, and the Veterans Administration appoints a fiduciary to help that veteran manage his or her financial affairs. But under current VA policy, can we have order, Madam President? Under current VA policy, get this, under current VA policy, if a veteran who defended this country has to go to the VA and ask for help managing his or her financial affairs, the VA automatically reports that veteran to the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System, we call it NICS, and that veteran loses his firearm. He loses his firearm automatically. No due process. No questions asked. This decision has not been made by a judge. It's being made by a bureaucrat. All our amendment would do would be to say, the VA, just because you've asked for help with your money, cannot automatically take away your firearm or report you to NICS unless a judge has ruled that that veteran is a danger to himself or to others. And I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
The junior senator from Connecticut.
Madam President, I thought one of the few things that we agreed on firearms was that people with serious mental illness, people who are judged to be mentally incompetent, shouldn't be able to buy guns. And that's what we're talking about here today. We are not talking about people who just can't balance their checkbook. We're not talking about people who just need some assistance with their financial affairs. The standard that the VA uses is the standard of mental incompetence. These are veterans who have been judged to be mentally incapacitated. And let me put a finer point on it. 1/3 of the veterans we're talking about in this category are diagnosed schizophrenics. And this amendment allows for every single one of them to have their gun rights restored. Some of the most mentally ill people in this nation, people to whom we owe a duty of care, people who are frankly more prone to suicide than the general population, are now going to be able to get their hands on a weapon to kill themselves or others if we pass this. This is a death sentence for scores of deeply mentally ill veterans. What it does not do is set up some process by which to have a court judge whether or not they should own a gun. In fact, there is no current cause of action for that to occur. And we didn't have to be at this point where our only choice is to restore gun rights even to actively suicidal veterans. We made an offer to sit down and try to work out a compromise, a better appeals process, a mechanism for these veterans to go to court. But that did not happen. That offer was not accepted. And so instead, Madam President, we are voting on an amendment that gives gun rights back to every single seriously mentally ill veteran who've been judged to be mentally incompetent, even those that are actively suicidal. That is a death sentence. A death sentence for thousands of seniors, thousands of veterans all across this country if this becomes law. This is a terrible idea, and we should defeat it.
The junior senator from Louisiana.
Madam President, with all the respect I can muster, my colleague is, what he has said is inaccurate. Now, I understand this is America. You can believe what you want. There's some people that wish we didn't have a second amendment. I get that, but we do. And I agree with Senator Murphy. We both agree on this. Chris believes that love is the answer, and I do too. But I own a handgun just in case, and that's my right. And every veteran has that right. And we shouldn't take away a person's gun without a judge, not a bureaucrat at the VA, ruling that person mentally incompetent.
It was one of those moments in Washington that slices through the noise. When conviction meets accusation, and the air in the chamber seems to tighten. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana stood firm, his voice edged with controlled defiance. Across from him, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut met him with fire of his own, warning of tragedy, of death, of the government's duty to protect its citizens from themselves. The chamber held its breath. Two visions of America collided in full daylight, one rooted in liberty, the other in fear of its cost. Moments earlier, Senator Tester had lent his voice to Kennedy's amendment, a proposal simple in form, seismic in meaning. He spoke for veterans in Montana and across the nation, men and women who had borne the burden of service only to find their rights questioned by the very government they defended. His words were plain. A veteran should not lose his Second Amendment rights simply because he seeks help managing his finances. And yet, beneath those words lies a deep, quiet tension, the question of who decides when freedom must yield to protection, when trust in the citizen ends and power of the state begins. Senator Kennedy, with his Southern cadence, made his case clear. If a veteran asks for help, he said, a bureaucrat at the VA should not be able to take away his firearm automatically. No due process, no judge, no questions asked. His tone was not merely procedural, it was moral. For him, the amendment was not about policy, it was about principle, about the idea that liberty is not conditional on one's convenience to the system. Then came Senator Murphy. His argument was raw, unflinching, and emotional. He invoked the specter of suicide, the fragility of the human mind, and the terrifying possibility of violence. This, he said, is a death sentence for thousands of veterans. He painted the amendment as a door thrown open to chaos, to firearms in the hands of the deeply ill, the broken, the hopeless. To Murphy, this was not about freedom. It was about survival, about the government's solemn duty to protect its citizens, even from themselves. It was a clash that could only happen in America, where liberty and safety wage their eternal duel, and neither side ever truly wins. As Murphy's voice rose, Kennedy's reply came like a still blade in the air. What he has said, he declared, is inaccurate. The words were not shouted. They were measured, deliberate, the kind that cut not through volume, but through clarity. In that moment, the floor of the Senate was not just a place of debate. It was a reflection of the American conscience itself. Two men, both believing they spoke for justice, standing on opposite sides of a constitutional chasm, one guarded by fear of what might happen if power hesitates, the other by fear of what happens when it does not. And beyond those walls, millions of veterans, men and women who carried the flag through foreign dust, who returned home to bureaucracies that see them as data points, not patriots, watched and waited. For them, this was not abstract. It was deeply personal. For every veteran who struggles with trauma, who reaches for help but fears the price, this debate echoes. The question is not just about guns. It is about dignity, about trust, about whether the government that calls them heroes believes they are still capable of being free. Senator Kennedy's words, "I own a handgun, just in case," carried more than humor. They carried a truth written into the bones of this country, that freedom is not sterile, it is not safe, it is not given by government decree. It is held by individuals willing to bear its burden, even when it terrifies those who seek to control it. Senator Murphy's fear is not unfounded. The pain of suicide among veterans is real, unrelenting, a national wound. But the tragedy of the system is this: it so often confuses compassion with control. It replaces care with confiscation, help with oversight. It tells the veteran, "We thank you for your service, but we no longer trust your judgment." That is the quiet heartbreak buried beneath this debate. It is the story of a country that calls its defenders heroes, then subjects them to suspicion. That claims to honor liberty, yet binds it with red tape and bureaucratic caution. The hearing may end, the vote may pass or fail, but the question endures: how much power should we grant the state over the souls it swore to serve? Because every law passed in these halls, every amendment debated, is not merely policy. It is a declaration of who we are as a people. Whether we believe that freedom belongs only to the stable, or whether it belongs to every American, even those who stumble, even those who struggle, even those whose minds have weathered the storms of war. Kennedy's defiance and Murphy's alarm mark two sides of the same coin. Fear, one of tyranny, the other of tragedy. But history has always shown which fear lasts longer. Tyranny, once permitted in the name of protection, never returns what it takes. So when the chamber quiets, when the cameras shut down and the marble halls empty, the echo remains. A question whispered through every generation of Americans. Do we trust our citizens or do we fear them? The veterans who wait for that answer deserve more than bureaucracy. They deserve belief. Because freedom, once surrendered for safety, is rarely reclaimed. Music swells, slow, resolute, reverent. Narrator, firm, rising tone. In this chamber, words like liberty, justice, and rights are spoken often, but only sometimes are they truly tested. Today, they were. And when future generations look back on these debates, they will not ask who won the argument. They will ask who defended the principle. This is not just about guns. It is about the promise of America that no citizen, no soldier, no veteran should lose their freedom without a fair hearing before a judge. Because liberty, once taken by bureaucratic hand, cannot be easily restored. This was the Senate floor, raw, divided, alive with the pulse of democracy itself. And this debate, fierce as it was, reminds us that the struggle for freedom never ends. It only changes form. For truth, for accountability, for liberty, this has been Liberty Congress of USA. Subscribe, stand with us, and help keep the light of freedom burning.